"Alex, we're going in a different direction. Clean out your desk by the end of the day," he said, not even looking me in the eye. I still remember the exact moment. After 17 years of dedicated service, working weekends, missing family events, being the first one in and the last one out, my boss called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. What he didn't know was that I'd been secretly documenting everything for years, and I was about to become his worst nightmare. My name is Alex Morgan, and my story begins in 2006 when I joined Meridian Technology Solutions as a bright-eyed 24-year-old systems analyst. Back then, Meridian was an up-and-coming player in enterprise software solutions, not the corporate giant it would later become. There were only 40 of us in the entire company, working out of a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and inconsistent heating. The CEO, Richard Henley, knew everyone by name and would bring his golden retriever to the office on Fridays. I remember my first day like it was yesterday. My manager, Diana Chen, handed me a company laptop that was already outdated and said, "Welcome to the chaos. Try to keep up." But beneath her tough exterior, Diana was brilliant and fair, a mentor who demanded excellence but also recognized and rewarded it. Under her guidance, I learned not just how to code better systems, but how to understand what clients truly needed, often before they knew themselves. Those early years were exhilarating. We worked punishing hours, but it never really felt like work. We were building something together, disrupting established players, celebrating each new client win with cheap champagne and pizza parties that would stretch into the early morning hours. When we landed the Westfield account, our first Fortune 500 client, Richard gave everyone an unexpected bonus and a week off. I used mine to take my parents to Yellowstone, a trip I'd promised them for years. By 2010, Meridian had grown to over 200 employees. We moved into a gleaming office downtown, complete with standing desks, an espresso bar, and a game room that nobody actually had time to use. The company culture was still intact, though. We were a family, weathering storms together, celebrating victories as one team. When the financial crisis hit, and we had to tighten our belts, Richard took the biggest pay cut of all. "We'll get through this without losing a single job," he promised. And somehow, we did. I was promoted to team lead that year, then to department manager 2 years later. My team consistently delivered projects on time and under budget, earning me a reputation as someone who could make the impossible happen. I started getting calls from headhunters, offering positions with higher salaries and fancier titles, but I always declined. Meridian wasn't just where I worked, it had become my second home. In 2013, my personal life hit a rough patch. My marriage to Sarah, my college sweetheart, fell apart after years of growing apart. Work became my sanctuary, the one place where I still felt competent and valued. I threw myself into a major system overhaul that had been deemed too complex by external consultants. For 6 months, I practically lived in the office, going home only to shower and change clothes. Diana worried about me, even tried to force me to take time off, but I needed the distraction. The system I developed during that dark period would later become Meridian's flagship product, Element Sync. It was revolutionary in how it integrated disparate data sources in real time, making it possible for large enterprises to have a unified view of their operations without expensive custom integrations. I didn't realize it then, but Element Sync would eventually generate over 40% of the company's revenue. At the time, I was just grateful for the challenging problem that kept my mind occupied during sleepless nights. Richard recognized the potential immediately. "This isn't just good, Alex. It's game-changing," he said after the first demo. He insisted on crediting me as the primary architect and made sure I received not just recognition, but also a percentage of the licensing fees. That first year, my bonus was more than my entire annual salary had been when I started. Between 2014 and 2017, Meridian's growth was exponential. We expanded internationally, opening offices in London, Singapore, and Berlin. Our staff grew to over 1,500 people, spread across the globe. I was promoted to Director of Product Innovation, leading a team of brilliant engineers who kept pushing the boundaries of what our software could do. I traveled constantly, spending weeks at a time in hotel rooms and airport lounges. It was exhausting but fulfilling, seeing the company I'd helped build become a global success story. During this period, I developed a proprietary workflow system called Morganflow as a side project. It was initially just a tool to help my team collaborate more efficiently, but it proved so effective that it was gradually adopted across the entire company. Richard approached me about patenting it, insisting that I be named as the inventor with Meridian licensing the technology. "Your contribution should be properly recognized and rewarded," he said. The patent was granted in 2016, and Morganflow became another significant revenue stream for both me and the company. Everything changed in 2018 when Richard announced his retirement. After building Meridian from a startup to a market leader valued at over $2 billion, he was ready to step back. The board brought in Jeffrey Palmer, a Harvard MBA with an impressive resume of scaling tech companies. In his welcome speech, Palmer praised Meridian's innovation culture and promised to honor the company's DNA while taking it to even greater heights. For the first 6 months, Palmer seemed true to his word. He took time to understand the business, meeting with key team members and listening to our insights. He even invited me to join a strategic planning retreat in Aspen, where he asked thoughtful questions about Element Sync's development and future potential. I began to think that perhaps the transition wouldn't be as disruptive as I had feared. Then came the reorganization. Palmer announced a new management structure that introduced 3 additional layers between department heads and the executive team. Suddenly, I found myself reporting to Marcus Reynolds, a slick 35-year-old brought in from one of Palmer's previous companies. Marcus had no technical background, but had an MBA from Wharton and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Our first meeting set the tone for our relationship. I had prepared a detailed presentation on the upcoming Element Sync 4.0 release, complete with market analysis and projected revenue impact. 5 minutes in, Marcus interrupted me. "Let's cut to the chase, Alex. These technical details aren't important at the strategic level. Just give me the timeline and budget requirements." When I tried to explain that understanding the technical architecture was crucial to appreciating the competitive advantage, he checked his watch and said, "I have another meeting in 10 minutes. Just email me the bullet points." Over the next year, I watched as the company I loved transformed into something unrecognizable. The open-door policy that had defined Meridian's leadership was replaced by hierarchical communication channels. Decisions that once took days now required weeks of meetings and approvals. Innovation was stifled by risk-averse middle managers who were more concerned with protecting their positions than pushing boundaries. Diana, my longtime mentor, was the first of the old guard to leave. After being sidelined in a similar reorganization, she accepted a position with a competitor. "Get out while your reputation is still intact," she warned me during our goodbye lunch. "This isn't the Meridian we built." I nodded, but convinced myself that I could weather the storm. After all, I had survived the company's lean years. Surely I could adapt to new management styles. I tried to work within the new system, scheduling regular meetings with Marcus to keep him informed about my team's progress. But increasingly, I noticed that my ideas were being presented to senior leadership as his own. Projects I had championed would mysteriously become strategic initiatives led by Marcus, with my name nowhere to be found in the presentation materials. When Element Sync 4.0 finally launched, a release that I had overseen from conception to completion, Marcus gave a company-wide presentation taking credit for its innovative features. I wasn't even invited to attend. The situation with Morganflow was even more troubling. In early 2021, I discovered that Meridian had begun licensing my patented workflow system to enterprise clients without properly attributing it to me or paying the licensing fees outlined in our agreement. When I raised the issue with Marcus, he dismissed my concerns. Legal is handling all that. I'm sure it's just an administrative oversight. Months passed, and despite multiple follow-ups, the situation remained unresolved. It wasn't just me. I watched as other long-term employees, particularly those over 40, were gradually marginalized. Experienced team members were passed over for promotions in favor of younger, less expensive hires who were part of Marcus's growing network. The official explanation was always about fresh perspectives and digital native thinking, but the pattern was unmistakable. By 2022, the toxic culture had begun to affect my health. I developed insomnia, grinding my teeth at night as I replayed conversations with Marcus in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said. My doctor warned me about my rising blood pressure and suggested stress leave. But I couldn't bring myself to step away. Partly out of loyalty to what Meridian had once been, partly out of fear that in my absence, Marcus would dismantle the systems and teams I had built over nearly 2 decades. It was around this time that I began keeping detailed records. It wasn't a premeditated decision to gather ammunition, rather, it started as a coping mechanism. After particularly frustrating meetings, I would document what had been said and decided, noting discrepancies between verbal directions and subsequent actions. I saved emails, took screenshots of altered documents, recorded video conferences. With everyone's knowledge, Meridian's policy required all meetings to be recorded for international team members. I also started quietly checking in with former colleagues who had left under similar circumstances. Over coffee or video calls, we would commiserate about the company's transformation. Many had stories similar to mine. Gradual exclusion from decision-making, credit for their work being reassigned, eventually being pushed out on dubious grounds. A pattern was emerging, one that smacked of age discrimination and targeted removal of employees with institutional knowledge and higher salaries. In March 2023, I was asked to adjust some reporting metrics for a quarterly business review. The request came from Marcus via a phone call rather than email, a red flag in itself. "We need to show at least 15% growth in the European sector," he said. "The actual numbers are coming in around 9%, but Palmer's promised the board 15%, so that's what we need to deliver." When I pointed out that manipulating the data would be not only unethical, but potentially fraudulent, Marcus laughed. "It's not manipulation, Alex. It's strategic reporting. Just focus on paid licenses rather than active users for this quarter. We'll balance it out next time." I pretended to agree, but documented the conversation immediately afterward. Over the next few months, similar requests came in, always verbally, always with plausible deniability built in. I appeared to comply while maintaining separate records of the actual figures. I wasn't sure what I would do with this information, but something told me to keep it safe. In November 2023, Meridian announced a partnership with Axion Systems, a direct competitor that had been aggressively trying to reverse engineer Element Sync for years. The press release described it as a strategic alliance to expand market reach, but it made no sense from a technical or business perspective. When I requested to be part of the integration planning given my intimate knowledge of Element Sync's architecture, Marcus denied my request. "We're keeping this circle intentionally small," he said. "Don't worry about it." Through a former colleague now working at Axion, I learned that the partnership was actually the first step in a planned acquisition. Palmer was positioning Meridian for a buyout, and Axion was particularly interested in acquiring the Element Sync technology and its client base. The deal would result in massive payouts for executive leadership through golden parachute clauses, while likely leading to redundancy eliminations for many long-term employees. This revelation should have been my wake-up call. I should have updated my resume and started taking those headhunter calls seriously. But Meridian wasn't just a job to me. It represented the best years of my professional life. Countless late nights and early mornings, friendships forged in the pressure cooker of deadlines and launches. Walking away felt like abandoning a part of myself. Instead, I doubled down on documentation. I organized my records meticulously. Financial discrepancies, instances of age discrimination, the Morgan Flow patent violations, Marcus's pattern of claiming credit for others' work. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was simply protecting myself and preserving the truth about what was happening at the company I had helped build. January 2024 brought the annual leadership retreat. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't invited. When I inquired about the oversight, Marcus's assistant informed me that the event had been restructured to focus on forward strategy rather than operational details. The message was clear. I was being sidelined. The following week, I was removed from the Element Sync Steering Committee and reassigned to Special Projects, a nebulous role with no clear responsibilities or authority. My team was redistributed among newer managers, most of whom had less than 3 years at Meridian. My corner office was reallocated to one of Marcus's recent hires, and I was moved to a windowless space near the supply closet. Some colleagues avoided eye contact in the hallways, as if my apparent demotion might be contagious. Others reached out discreetly, sharing their own concerns about the company's direction and the increasingly cutthroat culture. A few warned me that my name had come up in executive discussions about legacy overhead that needed to be trimmed before the next quarterly report. Despite these warning signs, the actual moment of termination caught me by surprise. It was a Friday afternoon in May 2024. I had just finished a productive meeting with a client who had been with us since the early days, one of the few relationships I was still allowed to manage directly. My calendar showed no further meetings, so I planned to use the quiet afternoon to catch up on documentation for a system enhancement my team had implemented before being disbanded. The call from Marcus's assistant came at 3:47 p.m. "Marcus would like to see you in conference room B. HR will be joining." Her voice was carefully neutral, but I heard the undercurrent of discomfort. She had been with the company almost as long as I had. She knew what this meant. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the blinds in conference room B were closed. Unusual for a space specifically designed to showcase the panoramic city views. My access badge, which normally opened any door in the building, required 2 attempts before the light turned green. Later I would learn that my permissions had already been restricted in the system. Inside the conference room, Marcus sat alongside Vanessa from HR, both with identical manila folders in front of them. Neither stood when I entered. "Take a seat, Alex," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from them. He was wearing his Navy power suit, the one he reserved for board meetings and client presentations. I suddenly became acutely aware that I was in jeans and a company polo shirt, having dressed for a casual Friday with no external meetings on my original schedule. "As you know, Meridian has been evolving its strategic direction," Marcus began, reciting what was clearly a prepared statement. "As part of our ongoing organizational optimization, we've been evaluating all positions for alignment with our future goals." He paused, finally making brief eye contact. "Unfortunately, your role has been identified as redundant in our new structure. 17 years reduced to redundant. Countless all-nighters, solved crises and breakthrough innovations dismissed as no longer relevant to future goals." I felt a curious detachment, as if I were watching the scene from above rather than living it. Vanessa slid a document across the table. "This outlines the severance package we're offering. 6 weeks of pay, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and standard non-compete and non-disclosure agreements." Her tone was professional but tinged with discomfort. She had processed dozens of these terminations in recent months. I was just the latest casualty of the Palmer-Marcus regime. "We'll need your signature by Monday," Marcus added, already checking his watch. It has been instructed to disable your access by end of day. Please clear personal items from your desk. Anything left behind will be shipped to your home address. He stood, signaling that the conversation was over. I'm due in another meeting. Vanessa can answer any questions about the paperwork. I remained seated, my mind racing through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, anger, relief, vindication. All those months of documentation hadn't been paranoia after all. Can I ask about the specific reasons for my termination? I finally said, my voice steadier than I expected. Marcus paused at the door. As I said, it's an organizational restructuring. Your performance isn't the issue. He hesitated, perhaps realizing how hollow those words sounded after 17 years. Look, Alex, the company's moving in a different direction. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. The phrase echoed in my mind as I gathered the termination documents and walked back to my relegated office. Nothing personal about discarding nearly 2 decades of institutional knowledge. Nothing personal about violating patent agreements and manipulating financial reports. Nothing personal about systematically pushing out experienced employees to make room for cheaper, more compliant replacements. Security watched as I packed my few remaining personal items: a framed photo from the company's 10th anniversary celebration, a mug gifted by my original team, awards from projects long since completed. Most of my history with Meridian had already been packed away during my office relocation. The security guard, a recent hire who didn't know me from any other employee, escorted me to the lobby as if I might steal office supplies on my way out. The finality hit me in the parking garage. My dedicated spot, one of the perks of senior status, still had my name on it. By Monday, that too would be reassigned. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, not crying, not raging, but methodically thinking through what had just happened and what would come next. That evening, instead of drowning my sorrows or calling friends to vent, I spread my documentation across my dining room table. Years of emails, meeting notes, performance reviews, patent paperwork, and financial reports. The evidence of my contributions to Meridian's success alongside the evidence of the company's recent ethical lapses. What had started as self-protection had become a comprehensive record of corporate malfeasance. I reviewed the termination agreement carefully. The severance was insultingly meager for someone of my tenure and contributions. The non-compete was overly broad, essentially barring me from working in my field of expertise for 18 months. And buried in the legal jargon was a clause requiring me to forfeit any claims to ongoing royalties from Morgan Flow, a direct violation of the patent agreement signed years earlier. The document exemplified everything that had gone wrong at Meridian. It wasn't just unfair, parts of it were likely unenforceable or even illegal. They were counting on shock and financial pressure to force my quick signature. It was the same playbook they had used with others before me. As midnight approached, I drafted an email to Jeffrey Palmer, copying all board members. I didn't write it in anger or with threats. Instead, I presented facts: my contributions to Meridian's growth, the pattern of age discrimination in recent terminations, the Morgan Flow patent violations, the 3 documented instances where Marcus had directed me to misrepresent financial data to shareholders, and the evidence that the Axion partnership had been misrepresented to employees and investors. I concluded by stating that I would be willing to sign a mutually beneficial separation agreement that included a full year's severance, healthcare coverage for 2 years, proper recognition and compensation for my patented workflow system, and the removal of the excessive non-compete provisions. I noted that these terms were not only fair, given my contributions and the circumstances of my termination, but would also help Meridian avoid potential legal and regulatory complications that might arise from the documented issues. I didn't send the email immediately. Instead, I slept on it, reviewed it again in the morning with a clear head, and hit send at precisely 9 a.m. on Monday, the time when Marcus had instructed me to return the signed agreement. The response was swift and revealing. By 10:30 a.m., Palmer's executive assistant had called to schedule a meeting for the following day. By noon, I received a call from the chief legal officer who had been included in the email chain by one of the board members. His tone was conciliatory rather than confrontational. "We'd like to resolve this amicably," he said. "Some of the issues you've raised weren't on our radar and require immediate attention." By Tuesday afternoon, Marcus had been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. By Wednesday, I was sitting across from Palmer and two board members, none of whom could quite meet my eye, as they presented a revised separation agreement that met all my terms and exceeded some. It included a consulting provision that would allow them to access my expertise during the transition while providing me with additional income. "We value your contributions to Meridian," Palmer said, the irony of his words not lost on either of us. "This situation wasn't handled properly, and for that, we apologize." The apology was corporate and sterile, but it was more than I had expected. As I left that meeting, I passed Diana's old office, now occupied by someone I didn't recognize. I thought about calling her to share the news of my vindication, but something stopped me. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was the sad conclusion of what should have been a lifetime career. The aftermath unfolded gradually. I signed the revised agreement and received my settlement. Marcus never returned from administrative leave. The company announced his departure to pursue other opportunities 3 weeks later. An internal audit was quietly conducted, resulting in several other executives exiting the company with considerably less generous terms than mine. With my non-compete significantly narrowed, I established a consulting practice focusing on enterprise system optimization, the very expertise I had developed at Meridian. Within 3 months, I had signed contracts with 4 major clients, 2 of whom had previously worked with me at Meridian and sought me out after hearing of my departure. The most surprising development came 6 months later when Richard Henley, the original founder, contacted me. After retiring, he had maintained a significant ownership stake in Meridian, but had stayed out of day-to-day operations. The issues raised in my email to the board had eventually reached him, prompting his more active involvement in governance. "I failed the company by stepping away completely," he admitted over lunch at his country club. "I trusted the wrong people to carry forward what we built." He shared that Palmer had been asked to resign, and the board was searching for new leadership committed to restoring Meridian's original values. "They asked if I would consider returning as interim CEO," he said, then smiled. "I told them I'd only do it if you came back as Chief Innovation Officer." The offer was tempting, a chance to reclaim and rebuild what had been lost. But during my months away from Meridian, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been subsumed by corporate identity. I had reconnected with friends, started dating again, even taken up hiking on weekends that would previously have been spent catching up on work. My consulting practice was thriving, allowing me to choose projects that genuinely interested me rather than being assigned based on corporate priorities. "I'm honored," I told Richard sincerely. "But I think we've both moved on to new chapters. I'd be happy to help with the transition as a consultant, but Meridian needs to find its future without looking backward." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You always were smarter than me about the long game." We parted with genuine affection and a consulting agreement that respected both my expertise and my autonomy. Today, 3 years after that fateful Friday afternoon, I look back on my time at Meridian with complicated emotions. I'm proud of what I built there, grateful for the colleagues who became friends, and yes, still occasionally angry about how it ended. But mostly I'm thankful for the unexpected liberation that came from being discarded. My consulting firm now employs 11 people, including 3 former Meridian colleagues who faced similar exits. We work reasonable hours, celebrate each other's successes, and never ask anyone to adjust numbers or take credit for another's work. I make more money than I did at my peak at Meridian, but more importantly, I've regained control over my time and purpose. I still have all the documentation, backed up in multiple secure locations, but I've never needed to use it again. Its power wasn't in the leverage it provided, but in the clarity it offered. Sometimes meticulous record-keeping is less about proving others wrong and more about reminding yourself of what's right. The greatest irony? In trying to discard me as insignificant, Marcus and Palmer inadvertently set me free. In treating my 17 years as disposable, they forced me to recognize my true value. And in assuming I would quietly accept unfair terms, they revealed how little they understood about the very strength and resilience that had helped build their company. If there's a lesson in my story, it's not about revenge or even vindication. It's simpler than that. Know your worth. Document your contributions. And remember that sometimes the most devastating response to disrespect isn't outrage, but quiet, factual, undeniable truth. Because when someone shows you who they are, whether it's a person or a company, believe them the first time. But also make sure they know exactly who you are. That knowledge might just become the most valuable severance package of all.